Hey guys, welcome to part 2. In part 1, we looked at the new Razor Gen 3 6-36 rifle scope, and today we are checking out their new 6x magnifier. Now, ever since LPVOs got good, magnifiers and red dots kind of became less and less popular, and I can kind of see why, because for the longest time, most of these were only 3 power, and that really couldn't compete with a 1-6 or a 1-8 for distance or precision. And a lot of the LPVOs out these days, like their PST 1-6, Razor 1-6, and 1-10, they look really, really good at 1 power and are almost as nice to use for short range as a red dot. Still, it's pretty normal to want to run a red dot as your primary and supplement that with magnification when necessary. And I'll go over this in just a moment, but first I want to talk to you about a couple ways to really get your money's worth when it comes to maximizing your capacity with a magnifier. Mainly that deals with your zero distance and your accuracy tolerance, I guess is a good way to putting that. What I mean is, with the accuracy tolerance, is how far can that bullet hit away from your aiming point and still be satisfactory. Quick little example, if you're shooting chipmunks, for example, those suckers are really tiny, so the accuracy tolerance is very small. But in something like a self-defense sort of scenario, you can be off by a couple inches and still get the job done. Odds are this will go on an AR type rifle, and it can increase the range and accuracy that you can utilize your rifle to. Without a magnifier, you're basically limited by the 1x magnification of your red dot and however far and well you can see with that. Having increased magnification will help you shoot further and more accurately, but most red dots don't have any means of accounting for bullet drop. So the question is, how can you increase your effective range with the weapon and not have any means of accounting for that bullet drop? A lot of that will depend on the size of the target and your ballistics. And I'll do an example with my Mark 18 right here. For example, my Mark 18 right here has a 10.3-inch barrel, and it's not really intended as a longer range weapon. So I wanted to be able to hit out to 200 yards accurately and still be good at close range. And when you play with your ballistics app, you can change things like your zeroing distance and what have you. It will tell you your first zero and your second zero, because when you shoot, your bullet's still going up. At your first zero, it'll peak, and then it'll come down on your second zero. And when you plug in things like your ballistics, your sight height over bore, and your zeroing range, the apps will tell you in terms of both inches and MOA and mils and all that, how far high or low that bullet's going to hit. So here's the info on this one. With a 2.9-inch height over bore and a bullet moving at about 2,500 feet per second, a 40-yard zero on this was also dead on at 200. And that's nice to hear, but how different is it for the ranges between those? Now, the absolute most that this will be off is a little less than 3 inches high at 125 yards. So that's worst case, I'm that high, which in the case of self-defense is fine. Right, so I've got my Mark 18 zeroed at 40 yards. I just confirmed it. Now, magnifier's engaged. I'm going to shoot at a target that I have at 100 and then one at 200. I'm going to do this freehand as well, so we'll see what happens. Okay, first shot, 100 yards. That steel is about 10 inches tall. Okay, now right to 200. And that's all holding dead on. That bullet, again, is zeroed. This rifle is zeroed at 40 yards. So a dead hold at 100 was a tiny bit high, and then we're pretty much on at 200. And for what this weapon is for, that's fine. Now, variables like a different sight height or longer barrel and that sort of thing can change these numbers. So if you have something like a 16-inch barreled AR, you'll have higher velocity, which means you could flirt with a closer range zero at about 35 yards and a second zero at around 300, but you'll need to play with the numbers and see what works out for you. Of course, there is a point where this method becomes a little bit impractical. I would say it's my opinion that 300 yards is about as far as you can get away with your second zero, because anything further, you risk having a bigger gap between your first and second zero. So if you want to have something dialed in at a farther range, the closer your first zero will have to be, and the bigger the spread that your bullet's going to be over your aiming point at ranges between those. So I'd say for self-defense type situations or combat zero type things, I'd like to limit it to around 300. And that's going to vary a bit there depending on your cartridge. 5.56 and 308, they're good enough at 300 yards for that example. But if you shoot something like a 300 blackout, even supersonic, I'd say about 200 yards is going to be a good place to set your limit, maybe a hair after. If you shoot 300 blackout subsonic, the ranges are way shorter. With a 25-yard zero with subsonic blackout, you're at about a 75-yard second zero, and that's pretty close. So I did want to touch on all that because it's very straightforward. If the target is within that range that your first and second zero is for, there's no thinking, no nothing, just hold dead on and squeeze it. But I did want to go over that with you guys. That way you can do the math on your end and see how best to utilize your optic. Now, back to it. It comes with a quick detach mount, which is very nice to see here. Just take this off. To adjust the tension on it, you would just get a flathead screwdriver in this part right here, and you can control the grip strength that it has on your rail, because all rails are going to be a tiny bit different. And of course, it flips to the side like normal. There's no buttons to push or anything. But there is one thing that I really like about this that I wasn't expecting. And it comes with a bunch of different heights, which is no surprise for absolute and lower 1/3 co-witness with the right spacers. But the way that I have it set up right now is it has a spacer for those of us that like to run their red dots in a 1.93, as I am doing with my Spark Solar in this ScalarWorks mount. It's such a simple thing to do. It's only a little piece of aluminum, but the fact that they included it and thought of that means a lot to me, and it means that I can use this magnifier. I don't have to get some other different one or have to rig up some spacers or something like that. It's all out of the box, ready to go. Now, I did mess with this a bit before finalizing on this setup here, and I've got a rather basic Magpul folding rear sight, and the absolute co-witness, the lowest one, was able to clear it by a tiny bit, so you'll be good there. As far as the eye relief goes, it's about standard with most magnifiers. You want to mount it right over the charging handle, maybe a little bit forward, and then even with your brace moved all the way out, it is still at a good eye relief. The turrets on top are capped, so what you'll do is you'll get this on the weapon, you'll look through it and your red dot, and odds are, out of the box, your red dot's not going to be centered in the field of view on the magnifier, and that's okay. You can take these caps off, and it's just a flathead to adjust these to center up the dot within the field of view of the magnifier. Also, I will say, and I've seen this with pretty much all brands that make a red dot and a magnifier, if you look at it dead on, it's not perfectly lined up with the red dot. And honestly, that's not a big deal. I even tried this with a lower 1/3 co-witness with this 1.93" mount, and it still looks fine through the magnifier. So it's one of those things where it might not line up perfectly here, but it's going to be just as effective, and when you're looking through the magnifier, you won't even notice it. One last thing I want to touch on is 6 power magnifier is quite a bit. So if you have to also pick up a red dot, I would be very picky about which ones you would look at, because a magnifier will show any imperfections. It'll blow up any imperfections in the quality of the red dot itself. So if the red dot is a bit fuzzy, it'll amplify that and it won't look very good. My Spark Solar looks great. The Razer holographic sight looks fantastic. Also try this with an aimpoint micro, which of course looked fine. Also tried it with a Trijicon MRO HD, and that looked really good. So be selective on your red dot selection to pair this up with, because getting a good one is really gonna matter for you. So overall, I think it's a bold move by Vortex, skipping 4 or 5 magnification and going right to 6. I think it was well executed, and it looks really good through my Spark. The glass quality is very good, and of course with Vortex's warranty, if you drop it off a cliff or into a black hole, they will replace it for you. So that'll do it for this round of new Vortex products. We anticipate them coming out with new stuff this year, so we'll bring those to you when we can. Also, comment below. We'd like to see your reactions to a 6-power magnifier. Would you rather have this or 3X or something like a 1 to 6? There's a lot of pros and cons to each one of these, so definitely comment below with that. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe. We have new videos coming out every week. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram, and we'll see you next time.